So good afternoon, Chairman Kellner and members of the Libraries and Education Technology Committee. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak about an institution that is so important to me, my district, and all New Yorkers, the New York Public Library. The usage of New York City's libraries is way up, 40% programmatically, nearly 60% in terms of circulation. The public demand for physical books is up too. More people visited public libraries in New York than every major sports team and every major cultural institution combined. Why then are we selling city libraries and shrinking the library system? Why are libraries being underfunded when we know they cost a fraction of the city's budget to fund them? Let me add that last night we were able in the City Council to restore funds for libraries to keep them open. I'm proud of the work that Councilmember Levin and I did to ensure that our libraries were fully funded. In this administration, as most of you know, we have witnessed the greatest privatization in the history of the city of New York, privatization of our libraries and of our public housing, privatization basically as a means to which represents the greatest transfer of wealth in the city of New York. How much are we shrinking the library system through these sell-offs? The first transactions are coming to light with New York City libraries, library officials, and city officials shrinking space owned by the libraries by more than 2/3, sometimes significantly more. The Joan L library may be viewed as an example of what officials plan for the rest of the system. Sold in 2007 and quickly closed in 2008, it is being shrunk, according to New York Times figures, by more than 2/3, from 97,000 to 28,000 square feet. The new space is inferior too. The replacement Joan L is almost entirely underground. In 2007, it was explained to librarians that the library was being replaced underground because otherwise the real estate developer wouldn't pay as much for the property. But the paltry sum for which Joan L was sold makes it clear that decisions are not being made for the benefit of the public. The New York Public Library is netting only $39 million for this 5-story library with recently renovated facilities on Manhattan's 53rd Street across from MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art. The 7,381 square foot penthouse apartment in the 50-story building is going up on the site where the library once stood and is on the market currently for $60 million. Similarly, the New York Public Library's Central Library plan involves the reduction of 380,000 square feet down to a mere 80,000 square feet. The Mid-Manhattan Library, one of the most used libraries in the city, and the Science, Industry, and Business Library, located in the old Altman's department store in 1996, was integrated with CUNY at a cost of $100 million, will be sold, and research stacks of the Central Reference Library at 5th Avenue and 42nd Street will be demolished. The 2 libraries sold will be crammed into the former Reference Library stack space. No future expansion of this space will be possible. Construction to accomplish these space reductions will cost the public a lot. The Central Library is expected to cost over $350 million. $150 million from taxpayer funds and the balance from funds charitably donated to the public. It is likely to be a net loss, the only theoretical benefit being the lower cost of running vastly shrunken libraries. Yet demolition permits have now been filed. The 62,000 square feet Brooklyn Heights Library was proposed to be reduced to 15,000, now perhaps only to 20,000. Library officials advocating the sell-off and shrinkage quibble about the space calculations, speaking in terms of equivalent space, usable space, found space, and the flexibility of replacement space built without fixed walls. No matter, the public assets being sold off are substantial. Let me say that again. Public assets being sold off are substantial. And once sold, we will never recover them. Government finance agencies like the library system and the city's education department have been looking at aging buildings in highly desirable neighborhoods and considering selling them to raise hundreds of millions of dollars in a weak economy. And the fact that we have not invested in the library system and in these aging buildings is basically an example of demolition by neglect. Last week, the reprieve for the Pacific Library came as the council voted to approve zoning and other changes needed to build a 32-story tower in Fort Greene, a few blocks from the branch. BAM South, the tower site, is in my district, and before voting yes, I held up the administration's signature project because I and Councilmember Levin insisted, no, we demanded, on maintaining the Pacific Street branch as part of any deal for the tower. And let me also add that this is a library where Girl Scouts meet. And I was proud to accept 3 boxes of cookies from Girl Scouts yesterday. And unfortunately, I did not share it with Councilmember Levin.
He has his figure to watch.
Yeah. So the agreement that we negotiated provided that the council would have to approve any disposition of the building, including a sale. We cannot afford to lose the library. The administration relented, and so underfunding all of the city's libraries is an excuse for these sell-offs and diminishes opportunities across the system with a definite discriminatory effect that is an attack on democracy. Shrinking the library system diminishes democracy for all, and it was an honor and a privilege to work with my colleague, my friend, and my ally, Councilmember Levin. Councilmember Levin.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilmember Levin.
Thank you very much, Chair Kellner, Assemblymember Millman, Assemblymember Mosley, Assemblymember Roberts. I want to thank you very much for holding this very important hearing. And before I talk specifically about the proposed library actions in the district that I represent in Brooklyn, I want to first acknowledge the great work of Councilmember Letitia James, most recently with regard to BAM South, and her steadfastness and her willingness to take hits from the editorial boards in the city and to really put forward a strong message that the library system is important, it is vital, and it needs to be protected, specifically with Pacific branch, that historic building be maintained, and that the library services there be maintained. And so I want to acknowledge her fortitude and her toughness and her consideration. With regard to Pacific Branch, I think that it's very important to note that this is the first Carnegie branch in Brooklyn. It is a historic building. I've recommended to the Landmarks Commission in the city that it be established as a New York City landmark. It is not currently, but it ought to be by every objective criteria that you could measure. There's no reason why this building is not landmarked, and it ought to be immediately within the next couple of months to preclude any raising of the building or anything happening to that building, and the services need to be maintained in that building. If the BAM South development has augmented services, has a new library, has a performing arts library, as the original EIS called for, that would be phenomenal. We would be appreciative, and we would welcome that wholeheartedly. But in no way should there be a library there at the expense of the Pacific branch. And so I want to again thank Councilmember James for making that explicit in that rezoning. Just one issue to point out is the Pacific Branch Library is located 1 block south of one of the deadliest intersections in the entire city of New York. I have data here provided by S.J. Avery of Park Slope. Pedestrian accidents from 1995 to 2009, 29 at Flatbush and Atlantic, 42 at 4th Avenue and Flatbush, 33 Atlantic and 4th. This is all within about 150 feet. And 21 at the beginning of Hanson Place. That comes to 125 pedestrian accidents or pedestrian crashes in a 14-year span from 1995 to 2009. And so, as Senator Montgomery said, communities that live around south of Atlantic Avenue, around the Pacific Branch, public housing communities at Wyckoff Gardens, Gowanus Houses, and Warren Street, to have youngsters particularly crossing those busy intersections presents an unacceptable danger and puts them into peril. And so that is one of just many compelling reasons, in addition to the library services, which are essential in to not decrease the footprint, and then also with regard to the architectural significance of that building in particular. I think with regard to the Brooklyn Heights branch, which is also in the district that I represent, this is something that I've heard now from hundreds upon hundreds of constituents, and I actually want to take this opportunity to apologize to constituents that have sent me emails for not responding individually, but there have been literally hundreds of emails that I've received from constituents expressing their concern and their dismay at this proposed action. And I want to let them know and to be on the record that this is something that I'm looking at extremely closely, and that this is we are taking this extremely seriously. And I think that the thing to look at, there are real problems there. There's a I would bet that that building is not open today because of the heat index. It's been closed all week because because of the heat index. Staff is actually under union rules is not allowed to even be in the building once the thermal heat index gets above 82, and that's to protect them from health danger. And what we have here is major capital needs, and so the air conditioning system has been out now for over a year, and so there's real needs there. In order for that library to be functional, those needs need to be met. Now, what I have not heard from Brooklyn Public Library is a compelling reason why that library would have to be essentially demolished and then put into a new development as the only way to save it. That should absolutely be absolute worst case scenario, last resort. I would, in order to meet the standard that of selling off public land to bring in revenue, which is not what the purpose of public land is. That's not what public land is there to do. We don't do that. That's not what we do as a city, right? So, in order to meet that type of threshold, it is wholly appropriate that there be every other avenue exhausted, and that is something that we have not seen. We have not seen an effort on the part of BPL to say, well, this is why this didn't work, this is why that didn't work, this is why the other thing didn't work. And so so that's why we have concern. I chair the subcommittee on dispositions in the council. In order for this land to be disposed of, it has to come through that subcommittee. And so I think it's important to note that up till this point, I have not seen compelling reason why this cannot be fixed through the regular means, just like every other piece of public property is fixed up with public assets and public dollars, and to address these issues and keep that library functioning and as is. And so I think that that's important to note at this point. And so again, I thank all of the constituents and people that use the library for expressing, not only to myself, but also to Councilmember James, Assemblymember Millman, Senators Montgomery and Squadron, just how essential these libraries are to their lives and to our communities. And I think that that's an incredibly important thing for us to hear, because that informs the way that we look at this situation, this issue. And so I thank them. Keep up that activity, and I want to thank you very much, Chair Kellner, for holding this hearing and bringing these issues out into the public.
Well, I just want to thank you both for your great victory yesterday, and I think you make incredibly salient points to the historic nature of the Pacific Library, as well as the fact that though we can draw 2 points on a map and say they're very close together, they're literally neighborhoods apart, and that's what libraries are. They're neighborhood institutions. So I feel a lot stronger knowing that you're standing at the gate, Councilman, in protecting the Brooklyn Heights Library. So thank you both for coming today.
I also wanted to say I wanted to thank the council members because year after year you guys have stood up to the administration and restored the cuts, and that takes courage, and I applaud you for doing that. The problem that we have with our libraries is that you restore the operating expenses, and these libraries throughout the city have real capital needs. And what was said before by so many of us is that we have to do something about getting the money so that the libraries don't fall apart around us. The one question I have, and it was something that our colleague, State Senator Montgomery, brought up, is that the appointees on the Brooklyn Public, they're governed by a board of trustees, and they're appointed by the mayor and the borough president. And when you look at the appointees, and 2 of them are leaving their appointments now, I guess it's the end of their term, and they're not asking to be renewed. We have to really look more carefully, I think, at their backgrounds, because if they're coming in, I don't know how they're selected. I've never had a conversation with anybody about how they're selected, but sometimes I think that their view is perhaps more similar to the mayor, that if it doesn't move, let's develop it. So I think it's something maybe collectively we could do. That was my suggestion.
First, I was remiss, I did not acknowledge my Assemblymember Mosley, who I work very closely with, who has worked with me in regards to the issue concerning the libraries and all things locally in our district. And of course, my friend Assemblymember Roberts and Assemblywoman Millman, you and Senator Velman at Montgomery have been my sheroes and my heroes all throughout my public career. And I don't know what the process is in regards to filling these vacancies, but you can be assured if they're subject to the approval of the City Council, both Councilmember Levin and I will be there to question and to block the appointment of any individuals whose interest is only to further real estate as opposed to the public of the City of New York.
Just one question. Thank you, Councilmember James and Councilmember Levin. Councilmember Levin, you talked about exhausting all of the possibilities. Can you just go into some details when you say exhausting all possibilities?
Well, we want to look at, basically what we're hearing from Brooklyn Public Library is that the air rights that are above Brooklyn Public, the Brooklyn Heights branch, are what's the value there, right? So they're looking at it they're saying, well, the entire system has capital needs throughout the system, throughout Brooklyn, and here we have value locked in air rights, and then they want to free up that value, essentially. That runs counter to the traditional view of public land. We don't just look at our public land and say, oh, well, parks have air rights, but this, the streets have air rights. We're not. That's not how we normally look at public resources. And the traditional way that we address our capital needs in public institutions is to have capital dollars go into that. And that's really what has happened over the last 10 years, or a little bit less than that with the Bloomberg administration, is that they have not really put in the resources in terms of capital. Here we fight every year to get the operating dollars that the libraries need to keep up full service, so we're not cutting days, we're not cutting hours, we're not cutting staff, not laying people off. But the capital needs that are going to continue to increase, there has not been a concerted effort to come up with the public resources, the public dollars, to address that, which is the way that traditionally public needs are addressed. We don't just, in other words, we as stewards of the public trust shouldn't look at the vexing issues of how do we update our aging infrastructure by just saying sell it off and make and use the money as a selling off of the resources. That's not really the appropriate or long-term solution, because to be really clear here, whatever money that they would be able to draw in as a result of selling off that property, that's not going to solve the Brooklyn Public Library system's capital problems. So they need to look at the city. There needs to be a real comprehensive dialogue with the city to say, how do we do this? How do we invest? How do we do the long-term infrastructure investment to make sure that our library system continues to maintain its footprint, stay open, and stay public? It's right in the Brooklyn Public Library. The word "public" is right in its middle name, so that's really important to remember.
Is this more of a philosophical difference between the council and the administration?
Yeah, I think that, I would say that the administration has come at this with a philosophical perspective, and that, they have certainly haven't hidden their affinity for privatizing or public-private partnerships or whatever you want to call it, but, the traditional understanding of public institutions is that they are public.
I think it is a philosophical difference, unfortunately, during this administration, the pendulum has shifted in a dangerous manner, much to the benefit of the real estate industry. And I think as we embark upon a new administration, that the pendulum has to shift back to a more balanced approach to developing our city going forward, and ensuring the public trust and preserving treasures that all of us appreciate and recognize. And I don't know, I can't speak for this audience and I can't speak for anyone else. I can only speak for myself. Growing up in Brooklyn, the public libraries were used by my parents as a means for childcare, as a means for me to get a better appreciation of the word and a better appreciation of our history and our legacy as a country and as a people. And so it's part of my DNA to preserve libraries, and that's why it was so really important, despite the hits from Cranes and from the Post and from the Daily News, to stand up and preserve and protect the Pacific Street Library.
Oh, and thank you both. Thank you so much.
One thing just I'd like to note really quickly is that while I chair the subcommittee on dispositions now, in a new term, I might not, and so that committee chairmanship might be open if anybody is interested.
Thank you, Councilman.